Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. Today in Bible study, we looked at Lamentations chapter 5. So, this is a follow up on Sunday, right? When we looked at Lamentations chapter 3. I wanted to look at what Lamentations 5 because it is different than the other poems in Lamentations. So, um, if you remember in my sermon on Sunday, I talked about how four of the five poems, right? Because there's five different poems in Lamentations, and they're divided into what we now have as chapters, right? That each of them is an acrostic. So they are like A to Z. That's how they're structured. So the first verse or group of verses in the case of Lamentations 3 are all the letter Aleph, start with the letter Aleph, so the A letter. And then verses, after that would be B and then C. It's different letters in the Hebrew alphabet. I hope you understand what I'm getting at. It goes from A to Z, right? So it's kind of the whole thing. Lamentations 5, though, is different. It's not an acrostic. So it's much more of I would say, a standard Hebrew poetry than the other one. And this one is very focused on this degradation of Zion. So this city of Jerusalem, right? What has happened to Zion in the wake of this? And this one is kind of set a little bit after as well. Like it seems as though the other ones were set in immediacy, and this one is set looking backward. Even at the beginning it says remember, right? So it's as though this was maybe written years later, and people are still reeling or hurting. It's maybe not as fresh as it was, but man, it appears fresh if you read Lamentations 5, right? There's some really sad and disturbing imagery in here about what happened to it, right? And you see a lot of reversal. So you see a lot of reversal of the promises and things like that. And you'll see this in verse 2, right? It says, our inheritance has been turned over to strangers. There's this ironic reversal in that when the people went into the land, when Israel went into the land, right, they were to drive out the strangers and the foreigners. Again, this is not a commentary on the place of the stranger or foreigner in society. This is mostly saying, like, this is the land, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and all those, and the Hivites and all the ites had to leave, right? Or join with Israel, because that happened too. So the nation as well has become what they should have cared for, right? You'll see this in verse 3. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. These are two of the groups that God takes special interest in, and maybe that is why the person is pouring their heart out in this way. But also, there's this remembrance that they fail to care for those people. And in verses 6, right, we have given the hand to Egypt and to Assyria to get bread enough. The idea that they've been signing these alliances and making these treaties with these nations that have forgotten them or have not cared for them. And you have something interesting here, right? It comes to guilt, generational guilt. This is either something we love or we hate in the United States. Sometimes we love this type of language. Sometimes we hate it. But in verse 7, it says, our fathers have sinned. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we bear their iniquities. And so in the Hebrew Bible, right, there's this interesting thing where you'll see sin carries through generations. And this doesn't mean that someone is judged for the sins of their father. Actually, Ezekiel talks about this. But if they share in those same things, then they will be judged, right? That's what it gets at. If they break the cycle, then they are not judged for them. But if they do not break the cycle, then they are judged for them. And you actually see this reverses itself in 16, right? It says, the crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us, for we have sinned. So the author takes on that sin for himself, seeing that his generation is in the same place as the generation of their fathers. And this, when he says fathers, this could be extending way back in his mind, right, to a period much before this where they were sacrificing to idols and the temples and the high places and stuff. It doesn't have to be just yesterday. It could, the idea of the fathers is it goes back into generations, right? And you see all the things that have happened, right? Women are raped, princes are hung up by their heads, young men are turned into slaves. The economy of the city has been shattered. That's what it means by the city gate. It's a place of social and economic work. Young men don't sing songs or dance to music anymore. Dancing has been replaced with mourning, right? So you have outward appearance of joy replaced with outward appearance of grief. All this, right, is just awful stuff. And you could see this generational trauma form here. And it always, you need to remember the hope that Jerusalem represented to the Israelites, and what they believed. They were so secure in their belief of Jerusalem that they thought that God would never bring justice down upon them. That's how secure they were, right? It's like thinking that America will always be top nation in the world, right? That nothing could ever happen that America would not be brought low, right? And then having America brought low, you could imagine the shock and sadness that would come in the wake of that, especially if it's done in such a brutal way as this, right? This traumatic way. So there's a lot of scandal here, right? Mount Zion lies desolate, jackals prowl over it. And you have this hope at the end, right? But there's this odd thing. It's almost as though it ends with an ellipsis. That's that dot 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 ending, where it's like unsure. So it says, "You, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures to all generations." Right? The God is king. Why do you forget us forever? Why do you forsake us for so many days? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. Unless, this is kind of the dot dot dot, unless you have utterly rejected us and you remain exceedingly angry with us. And that's how Lamentations ends, right? The interesting thing is that it doesn't say that the Lord doesn't have a right to be angry. Right? This isn't about arguing. I think this is where our heart goes, where it's like, no, you don't have a right to be angry with us, But the author seems to admit that the Lord does have a right to be angry with the way that people were acting, but also knows God's character and so and the promises of God, and so desires them to be restored. And so the book of Lamentations ends with a what's going to happen next sort of idea. And I mean, that's what leads us well into Ezekiel and to Daniel, who are the other major prophets who are prophesying partly for Ezekiel, and mostly for Daniel after the destruction of Jerusalem, and what God's plans are for that. So, good stuff. And a call for us to always be aware of our own sin, and to turn constantly back to the Lord and remember his promises, so we do not repeat the mistakes of our fathers, and thinking that the Lord won't bring justice down upon us when we do wrong. So I hope you guys found that interesting. I'll see you tomorrow for an episode of A New Thing. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and peace out.